Ryan laughed, picked the bicycle up with 2 fingers, held it away from his body like something unpleasant. "Sir, this is scrap. I can't help you." The old man didn't move. "Look at the Downtube," he said. Under 30 years of rust, bolted to the frame, was a small metal plate. He wiped it. Numbers appeared. Letters. A date. A military designation that Ryan didn't recognize, but which his phone told him, 40 seconds later, belonged to a bicycle issued to the Women's Royal Naval Service in May 1944 for deployment to Normandy. His hand stopped moving. "Who was she?" Ryan said. The old man looked at him with pale blue eyes that had been waiting 80 years for someone to ask that question. "She was my mother," he said. Before that day ended, a museum curator, a military historian, and a journalist would be standing in Ryan's small repair shop on Garfield Avenue, and the rusted bicycle he had almost thrown out would turn out to be the only surviving artifact from a woman who had ridden through artillery fire to keep the supply lines running, and whose commendation had been sitting in a military archive for 80 years without her family ever knowing it existed. What was on that plate? And who was the woman who rode this bicycle through Normandy? Drop your city in the comments right now. And if you believe that some things deserve to be looked at before they're dismissed, subscribe. Because what Ryan found under that rust changed everything. The shop on Garfield Avenue had been called Kowalski Cycles since 1987. Ryan hadn't named it. He had inherited it 3 years ago from his uncle, who had run it for 20 years before a bad hip made the standing work impossible, and the sign had been there so long that changing it seemed like more trouble than it was worth. It was a narrow shop in a neighborhood that was slowly becoming something different from what it had been. Old brick buildings, some renovated into coffee shops and studios, some still in their original function. The hardware store holding its ground between the newer arrivals. Kowalski Cycles somewhere in the middle, not fashionable, not decrepit, simply functional and continuous, the kind of place people walked past for years without noticing, and then one day needed and were grateful was still there. Ryan was 28 years old. He had grown up in the neighborhood, learned to ride in the parking lot behind this building, spent summers helping his uncle from the age of 12, learning to true wheels and replace cables and rebuild hubs. He had studied business administration for 2 years at community college before deciding that what he actually wanted to do was fix bicycles, which was a decision his mother had opinions about and which had turned out to be the right one. He was good at his work, patient and precise in the way of someone who has been doing something since childhood and has moved past technique into instinct. He could diagnose a problem by sound. He could tell by the way a wheel wobbled at speed whether the issue was the hub or the rim or the spoke tension. He had customers who drove 40 minutes because they trusted his assessments and didn't trust anyone else's. He was also, he would be the first to admit, efficient about lost causes. He had a limited amount of time. He had a realistic sense of what was salvageable. He told people when something was beyond help, because being honest about a lost cause saved everyone time. He did not labor over things that could not be saved. He assessed, concluded, moved on. This was not always the right approach. He had opened the shop at 8:30 that morning, made coffee, put on the radio, classic rock, his uncle's station, which Ryan had continued out of habit, worked through the queue, a road bike with a cracked derailleur hanger, a child's mountain bike with a broken spoke pattern, a vintage 10-speed from the 1970s that someone's father had left them, and which needed a full restoration Ryan had quoted carefully and honestly. Danny had arrived at 9:15, 19 years old, still in school, working Tuesdays and Thursdays. Enthusiastic in the way of someone who has recently discovered they are good at something. Ryan found him useful and occasionally exhausting. The old man arrived at 11:40. Ryan heard the door and looked up from the 10-speed. An elderly man, perhaps 80 or a bit past it, coming through the door with the deliberate pace of someone who moved carefully, not out of frailty, but out of intention. Plain grey wool jacket, dark trousers, black shoes polished, white hair cut short. His face lined in the way of someone who had spent significant time outdoors over many decades. Lines carved rather than soft. He was carrying the bicycle, not pushing it, carrying it. One hand on the top tube, one under the bottom bracket, held against his body the way you carry something you are accustomed to carrying. The bicycle itself was immediately, obviously, dramatically beyond repair. Ryan registered this in approximately 1 second. The old man placed it on the counter. Both hands, controlled descent, stepped back and waited. Ryan looked at the bicycle, then at the old man. He picked it up with 2 fingers and held it away from his body and looked at the rusted frame and the bent rims and the seized chain and the missing pedal and the rotted tires. He was about to say what he always said about things in this condition. Then the old man told him to look at the Downtube, and Ryan looked. The plate was under 30 years of rust and road grime, bolted to the Downtube at a position he would not have examined without being directed there. He got a rag, got the parts cleaner, worked on the plate for 8 minutes with the focused attention he normally reserved for mechanisms he was actually trying to fix. The rust came away in layers, each layer revealing more of the stamped metal underneath. The plate was approximately 5 centimeters by 3, heavy gauge steel. The stamping was deep and clear, which was why it had survived the corrosion that had consumed everything around it. When it was clean enough to read, Ryan photographed it. Then he read it again with his own eyes, slowly, to make sure he had it right. Wren, Field Transport Unit 7, Reg. No. 4419, issue date, May 1944. Below the registration, a service designation he didn't know from memory. He typed it into his phone. The results loaded in 40 seconds. He read the first result, read the second. He looked up at Arthur Pennington, who was standing on the other side of the counter with his hands at his sides and his pale blue eyes and the expression of someone who has been waiting for this look, the look of recognition, of understanding, for a very long time. "This bicycle was issued to the Women's Royal Naval Service," Ryan said slowly, "in 1944. "Yes. Field Transport Unit 7. He looked at the designation again. "This unit was in Normandy, after the landings, the support operations." "Yes." Ryan looked at the bicycle, at the rusted frame he had picked up with 2 fingers, at the bent rims and the seized chain and the missing pedal. "This bicycle was in Normandy," he said. "Yes." "In 1944. "Yes." He looked at the old man, at the plain grey jacket and the polished shoes and the pale blue eyes that had seen 80 years of everything. "Who was she?" Ryan said. "She was my mother," the old man said. His name was Arthur Pennington. He was 83 years old, born in Portsmouth, England in 1941, which meant he had been 3 years old in the summer of 1944 and had no direct memory of the events his mother had been part of. He had grown up with the bicycle in the family, not displayed, not stored carefully, simply present, leaning against walls in various houses as the family moved. Occasionally ridden by Arthur and his siblings in the 1950s, gradually retiring from use as it aged beyond reliable function. His mother's name had been Margaret Pennington, née Holt. She had served with the Women's Royal Naval Service, the WRNS, known informally as the Wrens, from 1943 to 1946. She had been 22 years old when she deployed to the Normandy support operations in the summer of 1944, a transport coordinator working out of a forward logistics base, responsible for the movement of supplies and personnel in the chaotic weeks following the June landings. The bicycle had been her primary means of getting around the base. She had told Arthur, when he was old enough to ask, that the bicycle had been the single most useful object she possessed during that period, more useful than anything else issued to her, More reliable than vehicles that ran on fuel that was always scarce. More practical than anything that required maintenance she didn't have time for. She had ridden it every day for the better part of 2 years. She had brought it home. She had not been supposed to. It was military property technically, but in the chaos of demobilization, nobody had been particularly concerned about tracking down every piece of field equipment. She had simply taken it. It had fit in the shipping container with her other belongings, and she had arrived home in Portsmouth in 1946 with the bicycle and a very clear understanding of what she had survived and what she intended to do with the rest of her life. She had married Arthur's father in 1947. She had raised 4 children. She had worked as a nurse for 30 years. She had never talked much about the war, not because she was damaged by it, Arthur said, but because she was practical and the war was over and there was a great deal to be done. She had died in 1998 at the age of 76. The bicycle had been in Arthur's possession since then. He had carried it with him through 3 moves. He had been told by several people that it was worthless, too far gone to restore, too specific to display, too ordinary-looking to attract collectors. He had brought it to Ryan's shop because the shop was on his way home from a hospital appointment, and something had told him on this particular Tuesday morning that it was time to try again. But that wasn't the full story. Because what Ryan was about to find out, about the plate, about the military archive, about the commendation that had been sitting in a file for 80 years without the family ever knowing it existed, was going to change the shape of everything that followed. Ryan spent 40 minutes on the phone that afternoon. His first call was to Marcus. They had been friends since school. Marcus had studied history and was now doing postgraduate research. His specific area was Second World War logistics and supply operations, which was the narrowest possible field for this exact situation to require. Marcus answered on the second ring. Ryan described the plate, the designation, the registration number, the date. Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Read me the registration number again," he said. Ryan read it. Another pause. Longer this time. Ryan. A breath. Field Transport Unit 7 of the WRNS Normandy support operation is partially documented in the regimental archive. Partially, because a significant portion of the unit records were lost in a filing office fire in 1952. The surviving documentation accounts for about 60% of the equipment inventory. The rest has never been accounted for. And this bicycle? Registration 4419 is in the surviving 60%. I know because I have looked at that archive. It appears in a May 1944 issue log, issued to a transport coordinator listed only by service number in that document. The bicycle appears in no subsequent inventory, no return record, no loss record, no disposal record. It was logged as issued, and then nothing. "Because she took it home," Ryan said. "Because she took it home, and it has been missing from the record for 80 years. A pause. "Ryan, do you understand what this is? This is a primary artifact from the Normandy support operations with a documented chain of custody and a living family connection. This is not a rusty bicycle. This is 80 years of documented military history that has been sitting in someone's family for 3 generations. Ryan looked at Arthur Pennington, sitting in the customer chair beside the door, hands on his knees, watching Ryan with his pale blue eyes. "I'm going to need to make some more calls," Marcus said. "Can I call you back in an hour?" He called back in 45 minutes. He had called the curator of the Naval Historical Collection at the National Museum of the Royal Navy in Portsmouth. The curator had called the regimental historian of the WRNS Association. The regimental historian had called a journalist who covered military history for a national newspaper. By 3:30 that afternoon, 4 people Ryan had never met were standing in Kowalski Cycles on Garfield Avenue. The curator was a woman in her 50s named Dr. Patricia Voss. She had driven 2 hours and arrived still in the coat she had grabbed on her way out of her office. She looked at the bicycle with the specific attention of 20 years of professional practice, methodical, thorough, examination gloves on, moving from the plate to the frame to the remaining components in sequence. She looked up at Ryan. The frame is consistent with civilian production models requisitioned for military use in 1943 and 1944. The modifications, the platform carrier bracket on the rear, the blackout-compatible light mount on the front fork, these are standard WRNS field modifications. The plate is authentic. She looked at Arthur. Where has this been kept? Arthur described the various homes and storage conditions the bicycle had occupied over 80 years. Dr. Voss listened with the expression of someone performing a rapid assessment of what was salvageable. The mechanical components are beyond restoration, she said, but that's not the point. The frame is structurally intact. The plate is intact. The provenance, the continuous family chain of custody from 1946 to now, with a living family member, is extraordinary. Most artifacts of this type that come to us have no provenance at all. She looked at Ryan, at the workstand where the bicycle sat. You almost threw this away, she said, not accusingly, factually. Yes, Ryan said. What stopped you? He looked at Arthur, at the pale blue eyes. He told me to look at the Downtube, Ryan said. The regimental historian was a retired naval officer in his 70s. Commodore Webb, retired, civilian now, small and precise, moving through the shop with the efficiency of someone accustomed to operating in limited spaces. He had brought a portable scanner and a laptop with a database that appeared to contain the surviving WRNS records. He confirmed what Marcus had told Ryan. Registration 4419, issued May 1944, no return record. The gap in the inventory that had existed for 80 years. He asked Arthur about his mother. Arthur told him what he had told Ryan. The Commodore typed, looked at his screen, looked up. I have your mother's service record, he said. Her full service number is in the issue log for this bicycle. Margaret Elizabeth Holt, Wren First Class, Transport Coordinator, Field Logistics Base Echo, Normandy. He paused. Commended for service in August 1944 during the supply operation preceding the breakout at Falaise. Arthur went very still. Did you know about the commendation? The Commodore said. No, Arthur said quietly. She never mentioned it. She wouldn't have. Women of her generation who served very rarely drew attention to what they'd done. Many of the commendations from that period are in the records, but were never formally communicated to the families. He looked at Arthur. Your mother was commended for organizing continuous supply movement of critical medical equipment during a 48-hour period in which the primary supply route was under artillery fire. The commendation notes that her use of non-motorized field transport maintained supply continuity when vehicular movement was not possible. He looked at the bicycle on the workstand. She used this bicycle, Arthur said. Not a question. Almost certainly. It was the only non-motorized transport registered to her unit during that period. Arthur looked at the bicycle, at the rusted frame and the bent rims and the seized chain, at the plate that Ryan had almost not seen. He had been carrying this for 25 years. His mother had been carrying it before that, carrying it home from Normandy, keeping it through all the moves and all the years, never explaining it, simply keeping it present the way people keep certain things present without being able to fully articulate why. She had known what she had. She had just never found the right moment to explain it. The journalist, a young woman named Claire, largely quiet during the technical examination, taking notes and photographs with the professionalism of someone who understood the difference between getting the story and being in the way of the story, spoke for the first time. Mr. Pennington, she said, would you be willing to talk about your mother, on the record? Arthur looked at her. Those pale blue eyes, which had carried the expression of someone waiting for the right moment, shifted into something different, something that might have been, in a less contained face, the release of a very long-held breath. "I have been waiting," he said, "for someone to ask me that for a very long time." The article ran 3 days later, a full feature, the photograph of the bicycle on the workstand at the center, the plate visible, Arthur beside it with his hand resting on the top tube. The headline, careful and accurate. The text telling the story of Margaret Holt's service, the commendation, the bicycle, the 80 years of family custody, the gap in the WRNS records finally filled. It was shared widely, more widely than Ryan had expected. He had been interviewed as part of it, the young mechanic who had almost dismissed the thing before looking closer, and he found himself the minor character in a story that was entirely about someone else, which was exactly the right position for him to occupy. The comments section included, within the first 2 hours, a message from a woman in Bristol who said her grandmother had served in Field Transport Unit 7. Her grandmother had spoken of a woman named Margaret Holt. She had letters, she had photographs, she would like to be in contact. Ryan forwarded the message to Dr. Voss. The connections were accumulating. The story was growing outward from the plate the way stories do when they have been waiting long enough, in all directions at once, drawing in the people who had been adjacent to it for decades without knowing what they were adjacent to. Arthur Pennington came by the shop one more time before the bicycle was transferred to Dr. Voss's care. He walked in on a Wednesday morning when Ryan was alone. He put a small package on the counter, plain brown paper, neatly wrapped. Ryan unwrapped it. Inside was a photograph, black and white, slightly faded at the edges. A young woman, early 20s, in Wren uniform, cap slightly crooked, standing beside a bicycle, smiling at whoever was behind the camera with the specific unself-conscious smile of someone who doesn't know this moment is going to matter. On the back, in pencil, Margaret, Normandy, August 1944. Ryan looked at it for a long time, at the young woman, at the bicycle she was standing beside, recognizable, even in the photograph, by the specific angle of the handlebars and the carrier bracket on the rear. "I want you to keep it," Arthur said, "because you're the one who looked." Ryan started to say that Arthur should keep it, or give it to the museum. Arthur said, "The museum has the bicycle, the commendation, the full record. They have everything they need to tell the story properly. I want you to have the photograph because I want there to be a reminder in a bicycle shop that the ordinary things you pick up every day might be more than they appear. That looking before you conclude is," he paused, "that it matters." Ryan looked at the photograph, at the young woman standing in Normandy in August 1944 with her cap crooked and her bicycle and her whole life still in front of her, not knowing that 80 years later, a 28-year-old in a repair shop on Garfield Avenue would pick up her bicycle with 2 fingers and nearly send it to the landfill. He put the photograph on the wall behind the counter, to the right of the window where the afternoon light from the street hit it. Simple frame from the drugstore on the corner. He hung it where he could see it from the workbench. Margaret Holt, WRNS Transport Coordinator, Normandy, August 1944. A young woman and her bicycle smiling at the camera. 3 months after the article ran, a woman came into the shop. Mid-50s, dark hair going silver at the temples, practical rain jacket, canvas tote bag. She looked around the shop the way first-time customers looked around it. Then she saw the photograph. She stopped, walked closer, looked at it for a long time. Ryan finished with the customer he was with and came to the counter. "I read the article," she said, "about the bicycle." "The bicycle went to the museum in Portsmouth last week," Ryan said. "I know. I called them." She reached into the canvas tote and placed a folder on the counter. Clear plastic sleeve. Inside, photographs. 2 young women in Wren uniforms standing together outside what appeared to be a logistics depot. One of them was Margaret Holt. He recognized her now. The specific angle of the jaw, the cap at its characteristic angle. The other woman was darker-haired, slightly taller, laughing at something outside the frame. "My grandmother served with the WRNS," she said. "Field Logistics Base Echo, same unit as Margaret Holt." Ryan looked at the photograph. "They were friends," the woman said. "My grandmother talked about her. Not often. She was like most women of that generation. She didn't make a production of the war. But occasionally. She said Margaret Holt was the best transport coordinator at the base. She said she could get supplies to places that no vehicle could reach because she would get on her bicycle and just go." She placed another item on the counter. A letter in a protective sleeve. Paper visibly old. Handwriting in the precise copperplate of someone educated before the war. "My grandmother died last year," she said. "She was 96. When I went through her papers, I found this. A letter from Margaret Holt, written in 1945 after the war ended. In the letter, she mentions the bicycle." Ryan read it carefully. The letter was warm and specific. Near the end, a paragraph that stopped him. "I'm bringing the bicycle home. I know I shan't ride it. It's done, really, after 2 years of that work. But I can't leave it. It seems wrong to leave it. It knows where it's been, and I know where it's been, and there aren't many things I can say that about. I'll keep it somewhere. I expect someday it'll matter to someone in a way I can't predict yet. Things like that usually do." Ryan set the letter down. He looked at the photograph on the wall. "I expect someday it'll matter to someone in a way I can't predict yet." She had been right. In 1945, at 23 years old, writing a letter to her friend, she had understood something about the bicycle and about the nature of objects that carry history. She had brought it home because it seemed wrong to leave it. She had kept it because she understood, without being able to fully say how, that it would matter someday. And it had. It had mattered to her son, who had carried it for 25 years after her death. It had mattered to a museum and a regimental historian and a journalist. It had mattered in a bicycle shop on Garfield Avenue, where a 28-year-old had almost dismissed it before looking at the Downtube. Ryan made a copy of the letter, added it to the file he had been keeping, a record of everything that had followed from an old man saying 3 words, "Look at the Downtube," on a Tuesday morning. The woman's name was Sandra Marchetti, Joan's granddaughter. She left her contact information and said she was planning to visit Portsmouth when Margaret Holt's bicycle was formally installed in the permanent display. She wanted to tell the museum about Joan and the photographs and the letter. Ryan said, "I think they'll want to know." She said, "I think so too." She left. Ryan looked at the photograph on the wall. He went back to work. Arthur called from Portsmouth 2 weeks later. He had attended the installation. His daughter had driven him. The museum had been, he searched for the word, appropriate. They had understood what they had and treated it accordingly. The bicycle was displayed in a case in the WRNS section, properly lit, with a placard giving Margaret Holt's name and service number, and the commendation citation and a note about the continuous family custody from 1946. He had stood in front of the case for a long time. His daughter had held his arm. He said it was like watching something that had been in the wrong place for a very long time arrive at the right place. Not that the bicycle had been wrong in the family. It had belonged in the family for 80 years. But there was a sense in which it had been waiting, the way certain things wait for the context that would allow it to be fully understood. His mother had known what she had. She had brought it home because she knew. She had kept it because she understood that it would matter someday. She had just needed the right person to look at the Downtube. Ryan thought about that after the call, about the specific patience of keeping something safe for a context you can't see yet. About 80 years between a young woman riding a bicycle through a Normandy supply depot and a museum case in Portsmouth with her name on it. About the 2 fingers he had picked it up with. About the laugh he had started. About the old man's voice. Look at the Downtube. He had looked. That was all. He had looked before concluding. It had been enough. The shop continued. Customers came in with bicycles in various states. Ryan assessed them the way he always had, honestly, practically, with a realistic understanding of what was salvageable and what wasn't. But he looked more carefully now before he concluded. He turned things over. He wiped the dirt away before making judgments. He looked at the parts other people's eyes passed over, the underside of bottom brackets, the inside of head tubes, the specific angle of wear on a component that told you how it had been used and by whom. He paid attention to plates, to small metal things bolted to frames that might look like nothing and turn out to be everything. Danny noticed the photograph the morning after Ryan hung it, looked at it, then looked at Ryan. Who's that? A woman who rode her bicycle through Normandy in 1944 to keep the supply lines running while the roads were under artillery fire, Ryan said. And whose son brought the bicycle in here and I almost laughed him out the door. Danny looked at the photograph again, at the young woman with the crooked cap. Almost, he said. Almost, Ryan said. He went back to the 10-speed on the workstand, trued the rear wheel, adjusted the derailleur, tested the shifting through all 7 gears, listening to the sound of each transition, feeling for the smoothness that indicated correct alignment. The wheel spun, the gears shifted. The mechanism, cleaned and adjusted and correctly understood, performed exactly as it was designed to. That was the job. He was good at it. He was going to be better. Danny came in one Tuesday morning with a find of his own. Not a bicycle, a photograph. He had been at a flea market at the weekend, going through a box of old prints, not looking for anything specific, just looking. He placed it on the counter. A group of women in wren uniforms, standing in front of a supply depot. The back of the photograph had a date, summer 1944, and a location, Normandy. In the back row, second from the right, a woman with a bicycle, the handlebars and carrier bracket visible, the specific profile of the frame recognizable now. Ryan looked at it for a long time. "How much did you pay for this?" he said. Danny said, 50 cents. Ryan said, "I'm going to need to make a call." He photographed it, called Dr. Voss, described it. She called back in 12 minutes. "This is a group photograph of Field Transport Unit 7. We have 3 photographs from this unit in our collection. We did not have this one. The woman with the bicycle in the back row, we can confirm from the bicycle's profile that this is Margaret Holt." Ryan looked at the 12 women squinting into the Normandy sun in the summer of 1944. At Margaret Holt in the back row with her bicycle, 80 years before her son would carry that bicycle into a repair shop on Garfield Avenue and set it on the counter and wait. He put the photograph in the file. The story kept arriving, in pieces, from different directions, assembling itself into something complete. That was how history worked, he was learning. Not all at once, not in a single revelation, but incrementally, through the accumulated attention of people who looked carefully and kept what they found. He looked carefully. He kept what he found. He was a bicycle mechanic on Garfield Avenue. He was also, apparently, something else. He wasn't entirely sure what to call it yet, but he thought he was getting there. His uncle visited in February, sat in the customer chair, drank coffee, watched Ryan work in the comfortable way of someone who has handed something to the right person and is glad to see it well tended. He saw the photograph. Ryan told him the story. His uncle was quiet for a long time. He looked at Margaret Holt with her crooked cap and her bicycle. "Your grandfather was like that," his uncle said. "Like what?" "Like what you've become. He never dismissed anything before looking at it properly. He said, I was maybe 12 when he said this to me. He said, the things people throw away are the things that were most used. The most used things are the most interesting. Never throw something away before you understand why it was used that way." Ryan looked at the photograph. "I don't remember him saying that to me," he said. "He died when you were 7, his uncle said. "But maybe you got it anyway. Some things don't need to be said to be transmitted." Ryan thought about that after his uncle left, about a quality passing through a family not through words, but through example, through the accumulated observation of watching someone attend carefully to things and absorbing the habit of attention without knowing you're absorbing it. His grandfather had run a hardware store on this same street for 30 years. He had been, by all accounts, the kind of person who looked at things properly before drawing conclusions, who understood that use told you more than appearance. Ryan had been 7 when he died. He had no direct memory of him, but he had the habit. He had always had the habit. The kid in the shop who looked at the underside of things, who cleaned the dirt away before assessing, who paid attention to the parts other eyes passed over. He had not known where it came from. He was starting to think he did. Some things pass through generations without words. Some ways of attending to the world are transmitted through the accumulated gravity of a family's habits, settling into a child who absorbs them without knowing. Ryan looked carefully at things. He had always looked carefully. He had looked carefully at the downtube of a ruined bicycle on a Tuesday morning and found a plate that had been there for 80 years. He had looked. That was all. He was going to keep looking. The photograph stayed on the wall. The afternoon light from the street hit it the way it always had since the day he hung it. Margaret Holt, WRNS Transport Coordinator. Normandy, August 1944. A young woman with a bicycle and a crooked cap, smiling at a camera, not knowing that 80 years later her bicycle would end up in a museum in Portsmouth with her name and her commendation on the placard, and that the photograph of her standing beside it would end up on the wall of a bicycle shop on Garfield Avenue, where a young man would see it every day from the workbench and remember what had happened the last time he picked something up with 2 fingers and almost didn't look. The shop smelled of chain oil and rubber and old metal being cleaned and understood and returned to function. Ryan went to work. He looked carefully at everything. Have you ever dismissed something before you really looked? Have you ever been the person who almost missed something extraordinary because it looked ordinary from the outside? Drop your story in the comments. And if you believe that looking carefully before concluding is one of the most important things a person can do, subscribe. There are more stories like this one, more objects that are more than they appear, more people who deserve to be seen. Look before you laugh. End of story. The plaque. 50,000 characters. Original work. Spring came to Garfield Avenue. The neighborhood continued its slow transformation. The coffee shop 2 doors down got a new sign. The hardware store on the corner changed hands, but stayed a hardware store. Kowalski Cycles continued. The sign that said that since 1987, continuing to say it, the fluorescent light in the window on in the mornings, the bicycles in the window rotating as they sold and were replaced. Ryan continued. Customers arrived with bicycles in every conceivable state. He gave each one the assessment it deserved, the honest estimate of what it was worth repairing, the straightforward recommendation when something was beyond help. He was still efficient. He was still direct. He still told people when something was gone past the point of saving. But he always looked first now. He always wiped the dirt away before concluding. He always turned things over and looked at the underside, the hidden face, the small details that other eyes moved past. He had always done this, in some sense. It had always been his quality. But now he knew where it had come from, and knowing where it came from gave it a different weight. Not a burden, more like a connection. Like understanding that a habit you thought was just your own is actually a thread running through the people before you, passed forward without being named. His grandfather had looked carefully at things. His uncle had watched and absorbed it. Ryan had watched his uncle and absorbed it. And on a Tuesday morning in November, the habit had led him to wipe rust from a plate on a bicycle down tube and find 80 years of history that had been waiting for exactly that. One morning in April, a young woman came in with a bicycle she had bought at an estate sale. She was perhaps 25, art school type, had bought the bicycle because she liked the color, an unusual shade of olive green that she wanted to restore. She knew nothing about the bicycle beyond the color and the fact that it had cost her $40 at a sale in the suburbs. Ryan put it on the workstand, assessed it in the way he now assessed things, methodically, thoroughly, looking at all the surfaces before concluding anything. The bicycle was a mid-century city bike, European manufacture, probably post-war. The components were worn but salvageable. The frame was sound. He looked at the underside of the bottom bracket shell. There was a small stamp there, not a plate, just a directly stamped mark, the kind put there during manufacture to identify the production run. He photographed it, researched it in the evening. The stamp identified the bicycle as belonging to a specific production run manufactured in the Netherlands between 1946 and 1948. A post-war production run using pre-war tooling. The olive green color, he looked it up, had been used by only one Dutch manufacturer during that specific period. He texted Marcus. Marcus called back the next morning. Dutch city bicycle, post-war gazelle production, Marcus said. There's actually a collector community for these. The specific color you're describing, Legergroen, army green, it was a pre-war military surplus paint that several manufacturers used up in the immediate post-war period because it was available and cheap. There's no military significance to it, but the paint itself, the specific shade, is quite rare on surviving examples. Worth much? Ryan said. To a collector? Yes. The right collector, the Dutch cycling history people, would be quite interested, Ryan told the young woman. Her $40 estate sale bicycle was, in the hands of the right collector, worth considerably more. He gave her Marcus's contact information and the name of the collector community. He told her that the restoration she wanted was entirely achievable and that if she wanted to keep it rather than sell it, he could do the work to a high standard. She thought about it for a week. She came back and said she wanted to keep it. She wanted it restored in the original olive green. She wanted to ride it. Ryan restored it. He worked carefully and thoroughly, the way he worked on everything. He sourced the correct period-appropriate components. He repainted the frame in the correct shade, using a formulation matched to the original. When she came to collect it, she looked at it for a long time. "It's beautiful," she said. "It was always beautiful," Ryan said. "It just needed someone to look carefully enough to see what it was." She rode it out the door and down Garfield Avenue and turned the corner and was gone. Ryan watched her go. Then he turned back to the workstand. The next bicycle was waiting. Dr. Voss sent a photograph in June. The formal installation had been completed. Margaret Holt's bicycle in its display case in the WRNS section of the Naval Historical Collection in Portsmouth. The placard visible in the photograph, Margaret Elizabeth Holt, Wren First Class, Transport Coordinator, Field Logistics Base Echo, Normandy, 1944. Commended for gallantry, August 1944. This bicycle was in continuous family custody from 1946 until its donation in 2024. Below the placard, the commendation citation, framed separately, and beside the case, a panel with 3 photographs, one of Margaret Holt in uniform at the logistics base, one of Field Transport Unit 7, and one of Margaret Holt standing beside the bicycle in Normandy in August 1944. Her cap at its characteristic slight angle. Her smile aimed at whoever was behind the camera. The same photograph that was on the wall of Kowalski Cycles on Garfield Avenue. Ryan looked at the museum photograph for a long time. At the bicycle behind glass, properly lit, properly labeled, properly understood. At the placard with her name on it. At the commendation that had been in a file for 80 years without her family knowing. He thought about Arthur Pennington carrying the bicycle through 3 moves and 2 countries, about the people who had told him it was worthless, about the Tuesday morning when Arthur had come into the shop and placed it on the counter and waited while Ryan picked it up with 2 fingers and started to laugh. He thought about 3 words. Look at the Downtube. He had looked. Everything else had followed from that. The recognition, the phone call to Marcus, the museum curator, and the regimental historian and the journalist, the article, the letter from 1945, Danny's 50-cent find at the flea market, Arthur in Portsmouth standing in front of a display case with his daughter holding his arm. All of it from 3 words, all of it from a decision to look before concluding. He printed the museum photograph, added it to the frame beside the Normandy photograph. 2 images side by side on the wall behind the counter. Margaret Holt in Normandy in 1944, not knowing, and Margaret Holt's bicycle in Portsmouth in 2024, properly known. The before and the after, the not yet understood and the finally understood. 80 years between them. He went back to work. Arthur sent a letter in July, a physical letter, handwritten, on plain white paper, with his address in Portsmouth at the top. He wrote with the precision of someone who was accustomed to saying exactly what he meant, and taking the time to say it correctly. He wrote that his daughter had visited the museum twice since the installation, that she had brought her children, Arthur's grandchildren, and that she had stood with them in front of the display case and told them about their great-great-grandmother and about the bicycle and about what it meant that it was here. He wrote that one of the grandchildren, a boy of 9, had asked to be a museum curator when he grew up, which Arthur found extremely funny, and also, in a way he couldn't entirely articulate, moving. He wrote that he thought about Ryan sometimes, not in a complicated way, simply as a person to whom he was grateful, in the specific way that you are grateful to someone who looked at something carefully when they had every reason not to. He wrote, "You looked. That's all you did. But it was what was needed, and you did it, and the rest followed. I hope you know that." Ryan read the letter at the counter in the morning before the shop opened, the fluorescent light on, the radio not yet turned on, the bicycles in the window. He did know that. He was still learning what it meant. He folded the letter and put it in the file with the copy of the 1945 letter and Danny's flea market photograph and Dr. Voss's correspondence and the article and Marcus's research notes. The file that had grown from a plate on a Downtube into something he was not sure how to categorize, but which seemed important to keep. He made coffee, turned on the radio, turned the sign to open. The first customer arrived at 8:47 with a hybrid bike and a worn rear cassette. Ryan assessed it, looked at all the surfaces, gave his honest recommendation, began the repair. The wheel turned. The mechanism performed its function. The work continued. Margaret Holt smiled from the wall. Her cap was crooked. The bicycle was beside her. Some things wait 80 years to be correctly understood. Some objects carry more than their appearance suggests. Some repair shops on ordinary streets in ordinary neighborhoods become, on an ordinary Tuesday morning, the place where a story that started in 1944 finally arrives at its ending. Ryan looked carefully at everything. He always had. He always would. Sandra Marchetti came back in August. She had been to Portsmouth. She had visited the museum, seen the display case, read the placard. She had brought the photographs of her grandmother Joan and Margaret together, and the museum had made copies for their archive. They had added a note to the display acknowledging the friendship between the 2 women and the letter of 1945. She came to the shop to tell Ryan this in person, which he appreciated. She also brought something else, another letter. This one from Joan to Margaret, written sometime in 1946, found in the same box as the 1945 letter. Sandra had found it more recently, going through things she had not yet finished going through in the months since her grandmother's death. She placed it on the counter in its protective sleeve. Ryan read it. Joan had written to Margaret after the war, after they were both home, after the specific strange quiet of returning to ordinary life from something that had been anything but ordinary. The letter was warm and a little melancholy in the way of letters written in the first year after an extraordinary shared experience ends, and the people who shared it are trying to locate themselves in the ordinary world again. Near the middle, a passage. I think about the work every day, Maggie. Not with grief, don't misunderstand me, but with a particular kind of clarity. When you know what you are capable of, it does not leave you. The bicycle, the roots, the supply runs in the dark. I think of those and I think, I knew exactly what I was doing and why. That's a remarkable thing to be able to say about any period of your life. Most of us go through years without knowing that. You and I knew it for 2 years in Normandy. I am grateful for that, even if I am also glad to be home. Ryan set the letter down. He thought about 2 young women in uniform riding through a logistics base in Normandy in the summer of 1944, knowing exactly what they were doing and why. Keeping the supply lines running, getting to places vehicles couldn't reach. 48 hours under artillery fire, maintaining the continuity that the commendation would later cite, knowing exactly what they were doing. He thought about that quality, of knowing what you are doing and why, of moving through a task with clarity about its purpose and its importance. He thought about how rare it was, as Joan had written, to be able to say that about any period of your life. He thought about the Tuesday morning in November when he had picked up the bicycle with 2 fingers and started to laugh and then looked at the Downtube. He thought about what he knew he was doing now, in this shop, and why. He was a bicycle mechanic. He repaired mechanisms. He returned broken things to function. He assessed honestly and worked carefully and kept records of what he found. And occasionally, rarely, in the way that truly rare things were rare, he found something that had been waiting for someone to look at it correctly. And when that happened, he looked. That was what he was doing. That was why. It was not the same as riding through Normandy under artillery fire. He was entirely clear about that. But it was what he had, and he knew what it was, and he intended to keep doing it. He put the copy of Joan's letter in the file. He thanked Sandra. She left. He went back to work. The afternoon light came through the window and caught the photograph of Margaret Holt at its characteristic angle, the one that made the image brightest at the end of the working day, the specific light of August evenings on Garfield Avenue falling on a young woman in Normandy in 1944 who had known exactly what she was doing and why. Ryan looked at it for a moment. Then he turned back to the workstand. The next bicycle was waiting. He had work to do.